Hello, Outlier Show. Today, Anirban and are going to talk about communication, but a specific aspect of it, as communication is broad, and we get questioned a lot about how we speak well in English or how we develop this accent and all that. So, sharing some personal journey about communication, it was certainly around 2 years ago when I encountered Anirban and found that, okay, my English accent really sucks. And then I got to know that, okay, you need to develop this thing because I was very prominent in grammatical shifts like subject plus verb plus present tense, all those jargons that people have to go through. And they think this is important, very important to actually speak in English. But it's not, after all. I suddenly learned some lessons, and of course, anyone has to learn too. So, what was the personal journey like? When did you encounter that incident where you felt like, hey man, I really need to work on this stuff. I have a shallow voice which sounds like girls. When was the moment you encountered this life-changing moment?
Okay, so I don't specifically remember any moment like you have where you felt a bit more peer pressure, though it was positive to an extent, but I
Yeah.
feel it was more like I used to live alone a lot. I used to always be kind of s- left alone in the group and as always an introvert, and I'm still an introvert, honestly, but I know the transition between ambivert. So the way it worked for me is that I used to spend my time a lot alone, and I felt that need to speak with me a lot. So I felt that, hey, I'm gonna stand and I'm gonna speak only, and I'm gonna explain what I studied. I'm gonna explain the things that I learned from biology, from physics, and all that stuff. So I started like transitioning. Like, can I just explain them in English? Can I just explain more things like about me, what I feel, all these expressions? Can I just translate them into English or not? So all these things, I remember the specific moment I was thinking one day, 2 years back, where I was feeling like, why am I not being able to formulate my lines? Why am I not being able to come up with the proper sentences? Why is it I'm getting stuck every now and then? Now, when I look back and I see the journey, a lot of things have improved, and it boils down to some facts that some processes we took in place. It might be different, but some fundamentals always align. So it was more like I used to feel lack of like everyone that I couldn't sentence. I couldn't just formulate a proper sentence. I couldn't structure it. And as always, you can't just articulate your thoughts properly. And you always felt like when you speak English, you get tired or your mouth hurts or anything like that. All these feelings that you come up. So those are the moments that I also felt that, hey, we need to improve on this aspect. So regarding this, like, was there any moment like, have you ever felt like kind of like God complex, not God complex, honestly, but like you got it from birth? Because I felt that I had a random journey, which I will share in a minute. But do you think that for you it is a complete transition from having more of a Bengali, very broken English to having more fluent English at the moment?
I think it's a cliche, like any music producer, like let's say Derek Sivers, the author of Hell Yeah or No, he develops his voice years by years, but we all know that voice or singing voice is something that is God gifted or something like that. But when Derek Sivers used to encounter people, let's say 5 years ago when he had a harsh voice, people would say, "Hey, you could never make it in the music industry." But then again, he practiced it, and then after 5 years, he developed a singing voice, and people would come to him, "Hey, singing voice is something that you are either born with or you're not. So you're very lucky to get that actually." So even though in our point of view, in the first person point of view, let's say we are talking with ourselves, in that point of view, it's all that practice that went into it. I don't think any magic incident that came up, like I ate a egg one day and I started speaking in English fluently. It was not that. And certain applications like Speakify and all those jargons that we have had to gone through and wasted our time in, it was very ambiguous actually. And to a certain extent, I believe that as I had the foundation of grammatical points, let's say I never memorized those subjects plus V1 plus present tense, this tense, that tense. I felt very boring to do that. And when I was practicing, I realized that we actually don't need that. So that was my personal experience with developing a voice. And I think developing a voice actually comes up with a lot of things. You can actually articulate yourself better. In Bangla, it's less likely that you would like my voice, but when you talk with me in English, and again, I'm not like portraying myself as something that is like speaking English fluently, but I am eventually. It's like something that feels automatic, but wasn't automatic once. So you have to get it. That was it.
Okay, so for me, when I say this to people, it might not be feasible as a strategy for people to use. It might be a good advice for your child, for your siblings who are young. But for me, it was like I used to remember people used to mock me that, hey, why don't you go to English teachers? What do you do in English exams? And I used to say that, I don't know. I just remember the English lines because I watch TV all day. So it's not to say, as a spoiler alert, that I watched English movies and shows all the time. I watched a lot of Indian TV shows as well. But there was a good amount of things that I've consumed that were in English from a very early childhood of my life. Of course, the availability of internet wasn't that widespread back then. It was only television. So I used to still remember, like, we had this box TV, and I used to just be very like 1 feet close to it and read all the subtitles and watch it, and sometimes felt like I wasn't even enjoying the movie as much as I'm just reading the subtitles only. So kind of in class 5 or 4, when I used to do all these, I used to like consume 12 hours of television every day. I never studied much throughout the whole year, except for the last 3 or 2 days of the exams. So I felt subconsciously those lines kind of got memorized within me, that I knew after should what would be if the context is something. So I could assume, and that's exactly the way native speakers speak their English. They don't pick up grammar first, they just take what they listen. So for me, as an introvert, having that advantage, though I didn't choose it intentionally, I chose it more subconsciously and as a bad habit, but it turns out to be giving more returns now. So for me, it was like more of the consumption side that I had in my early childhood. I could have done a lot better things. I could have read more books, but it kind of worked out for me. And of course, you can't go back to change your past that, hey, I wish I would have also watched a lot of TV like you and watched a lot of movies. But nevertheless, there's always a point to improve. So for me, it was like that kind of structured the foundations for me, honestly. That for my English, it structured my foundations. The last push for the breakthrough that I had to give was a bit more intentional, where I felt like, okay, I feel it's within me and I'm going to push it through like these strategic steps. Then I got into the rabbit hole of like how to improve English on YouTube. And there was like videos like, hey, have this course on Speakify, talk 30 minutes here, and like learn these 10 words every day and speak with your friends, speak with yourself, think in English. So all those small habits made, broken, done some days, done not some days, but consistently trying something new and pulling it out, somewhat like just pulling it out. I felt I pulled it out rather than built it, which is more of a case for you. But it happened for me that all those small habits placed together with one core overwhelming desire that I want to be eloquent in this helped me out. So for me, it was more of like I just pulled it out. So how would you tell for yourself that you built it? Because I know you were good at grammar, but let's put that aside. Like when you felt like, hey, I have to improve my English, similar to Anirban, what are the steps you took specifically?
I looked at how I would speak with myself. Like in my mind, I was speaking fluently and I was realizing that I can't speak it out. So what was the problem? And then I started making videos, me speaking, roasting people around our classroom. And that started out there. And I would say that, yeah, we can relate to a certain extent that this began from the very childhood, because I also used to consume a lot of English content back in my childhood. Let's say I used to watch a movie in HBO, like let's say 20 times, 25 times the same movie. So it's kind of built within me through the incremental progress. But in the moment that I encountered someone that had a better accent than me, it was like I have to improve. There's no choice left. So it's like giving yourself no choice. That was a breakthrough point. It's like synchronizing the 0 to 1 and lean startup analogy. Like you get this incremental progress, 1%, 1%, 1%. Then you have to make a breakthrough to actually make the product sustainable. So
Yeah, I feel it's more like lean startup works, and suddenly the result becomes 0 to 1. So that's
yeah,
how I also see it as.
English is a commodity to an extent. It's like wherever you go. Uh, okay, I wanted to ask you this question: like, are our academic books in higher grades, let's say in university, all written in English?
Yeah, I heard that it's all in English,
I
mostly.
used to, I
Hmm.
used to write dialogues, paragraphs about these things that you have to develop English because the higher education books are written in English. But I don't think it's that important because I see university books getting written in Bengali all over the stationaries and all that. So we have to treat English as a commodity. It's not something that we have the chance to neglect in order to sustain, let's say. Like if we can't speak in English, we can't actually know how the great minds speak, because there hasn't been that much great minds out of our languages. We have to get it.
Exactly. Hmm.
Even if we look at the people that had a great language, had a great language system, they used to speak in English with more articulated people, and that's why they became articulate. That's the process. I think English is a commodity.
Yeah,
And
yes. And
English.
regarding Rohit, you saying
Yeah.
like commodity, I would love to explain for our viewers what it means specifically. So to use an example here, like when you meet your friend, and let's say he or she suddenly started speaking English, you didn't notice that he or she is speaking English, and you were into the flow of the conversation, you were into the flow of the topic that was discussed, rather than like, okay, he was using English as a medium of communication. Not noticing it means it is a commodity. That's it. That there was no sudden surprise that, hey, someone was speaking English, my nerves got like cold, and that kind of thing. Not having that feeling means English has become a commodity for you, and that happens with us. That when we speak in English, it's actually never different. We see people staring at us. That's when we feel okay. We are not doing something that is standardized. But other than that, when we meet alone and let us say we are speaking in Bengali, or let's say we speak in English, we don't fucking notice because it has become such a commodity within us. It has become so natural within us. That's exactly how you want to treat it. That you want to make it so natural, so there's no special surprise. Yeah, right. I'll let you continue.
And it's like most people who try to develop a voice within themselves, a different voice, because it's not that every time you speak in Bangla or your mother language is Bangla, let's say, it's not that you would have to use that voice in English too. Like, let's say, আমি যদি বাংলায় কথা বলি, এখন ভয়েসটা অন্যরকম হয়ে যায়. So that's the whole point. Like this voice is different than the previous voice, and people misunderstood it for a lot of times in my life. Like they were saying, like, "Hey, don't act like something else," and all that. It didn't feel like portraying from my point of view, but it felt like portraying from their point of view. They emphasized on the thing that, "Hey, you are changing your voice," or some jargon and stuff like that. No, man, this goes like no effort. Unlike the Pakistanis that we work with, they say like, if I um, speak in English for let's say 1 hour, my mouth hurts. So those kind of propagandas that are built because you are trying to use your voice, use your previous voice into that specific situation, and you have to just get into this mindset that hey, this voice that I have already, and Vince Young talks about it more than I ever could. So this is the point. Your Bengali voice would be different than your English voice.
Exactly. Like it's more of like how you use your facial muscles to pronounce those words. So English has a set of facial expressions, facial muscles, movement that you use to pronounce English words to speak in English. Bengali has its own. So when you try to use Bengali facial muscle movement to speak English, that's where all the fuck up happens and you start to stutter and stumble. Now people feel they are portraying, but you have to understand that it's not that. It's kind of like using Bengali programming language to code something in English. I think that makes more sense here. So
Inshallah is doing that.
yeah, exactly. So you can't just put together the same stuff here. And I feel here the first change that has to be made within people to start making English more commoditized or making more natural in daily communication among students nowadays is that first step is to throw a mindset that I see and we see a lot, that whenever someone speaks in English and they're like, hey, it's, our martyrs have fought for our language and you're disrespecting. That's first something I would say holding back, something that's holding you back a lot. And one more thing is that you're trying to be fancy, that kind of thing. And so these are some limiting beliefs people hold, and underlying reasons are always like they are insecure, they can't communicate, or it is that they treat you like that because they don't want you to break out of the mold. So I feel it's first of all the mindset changes involved, that I will use English as a natural way to communicate. If you're a viewer who is listening to this, and if you're listening to this right now in the like it'll be published 1 week after now, and if you're watching like 3 to 2 days after uploading this, that means you are someone who's close around us. So if you take the lessons from today and come to us speaking in English, that's when we understand that okay, this girl has made it standardized for her now. She's not portraying, she's not like being someone else, like she's just trying to like standardize it. So first step I say is like having the mindset first by throwing the bad stuff and taking in some more new prototypes and mindset in their head. Like, have you faced all these criticisms yourself, by the way?
Or it's like, let's say it wasn't within the last stages of developing in English, but in the earlier stages, as I had gotten out of a herd that I used to be with another herd, let's say your herd, basically. So we developed a herd within ourselves. I dropped out from the previous herd. So the previous herd people, like previously the herd that I was in previously, so they used to nag a lot, like, "Hey, stop doing all these shits and all that." But by the way, I think with the point that it comes up, like the mindset shift, I think it's like uh, talking English, let's say, has to do with your understanding and thinking a lot. I was once attending a class of my math lecturer, and he said, like, why do maths? Why the fuck do you need maths? Like, yeah, we know that 1 plus 1 is 2, and if you integrate 2, it becomes 0, or differentiate, it becomes 0. So it's like these are like fundamental laws, but why do you do it? You do it to open up specific pathways in your life, in your brain. When you ruminate over one math, it's not systematic like the academic maths, but I'm talking about more broadly, like the one Ramanujan Srinivas used to do. Like he used to ruminate on numbers, like why do they act this way and all that. English is something that expands your appearance, perspective, and thinking and understanding, all these things all together. When you think in English, you would come up with specific words that you could not articulate previously in Bengali. And that's the thing, like just as math opens up specific pathways in your brain, English also opens up specific pathways in your brain. You need to think that there's again this propaganda that okay, martyrdom and all that. But I would say that to an extent, as all great minds thought in English, there might be something that was in that language. Otherwise, they could have studied any other language and just articulate it. So there might be something that we haven't even identified yet. Maybe we have, but I haven't researched that much, that made them prone to that specific language system. And again, coming to practice, uh, in the first place, we used to do a, do certain things like getting on a call with some Indians and Pakistanis and all that. And end of the call, I would say, "Hey, we have like 2 minutes left. What would you rate my English in 1 out of 10? I mean, 1 to 10." So they would like, "Hey, your English is like 8, 9." So what could I improve more? Then they used to say like, oh, improve on the pace and all that. So they used to give feedbacks on those things. And it starts with the social circle you have. Like, Anirban pushed me to have a better accent. He couldn't just criticize me for my English being in that group. Say he's something that, someone who just says like, you can't speak in English. I mean, you're just portraying yourself as someone that is very good at English, and fuck off. You wouldn't say these things. But eventually, in the groups that we are in already, if we start speaking English and we say, hey, let's speak in English from today and let's just develop a beautiful accent, they'll say, fuck off. So that's the problem. The main problem that we face at home. They say like, we don't have that kind of friends that would speak in English with us. We don't have enough resources, this and that. They go to like reading IELTS and TOEFL books 2 days before the exam. These kind of propagandas mostly. And you have to find a social circle, maybe virtually or physically, who can support that goal of yours rather than saying fuck off.
Regarding the point that Rohit has brought up here, that most people complain whenever someone gives them the advice that, hey, speaking more English with your friends, and they say that my friends are not interested. So the first step I would really suggest you, just throw away those friends, honestly. They're of no use. Now, if you're too emotionally attached with them because of the other qualities, have them. The next step I would actually suggest to you is more of what I would say intentional observation that I used to do, because Rohit had the opportunity to have me as a herd leader back then. But for me, it wasn't that. So I had to also choose my kind of inspiration, whom I could emulate. Emulation is very important whenever you want to learn something. People would say that you don't want to be someone else, be yourself. But there is no yourself unless it's very interesting, unless it has the skills. So first you have to learn from the masters, and that's why I think there are some certain words in English like square, shadows, which comes from these kind of analogies and ideations that you have to first emulate your masters. So I chose my masters. How? Like, you have a great privilege by being a person from Gen Z or Gen Alpha even. You have everything in your fingertips through your internet. Everyone has it. And that's it. You can choose thousands of and millions of native speakers as your master. And that's what I did. I chose a few public speaker I liked from my specific interest of public speaking. If you're someone who is into more astronomy, go find an astrophysicist for yourself as a master. And then intentionally observe what specific ways they pronounce a specific letter, what specific ways they pronounce a specific word. That's it. That's how you start. You start by observing those, and then when you observe, you will be bound to use them yourself. You'll feel you subconsciously started to use them. And that's how you progress. And you have to be intensely curious if you want to really achieve this level, where you, whenever you face a new word that you don't know how to pronounce, you are not embarrassed, you are willing to learn, and you go to Google and search how to pronounce it in British language or American language. That's it. Curiosity and before that observation, and before that choosing your master. So if you are someone who is a lot introvert and doesn't have friends, or if you have some sucker friends, this is the best solution to go for, honestly.
Yeah, and if you live near us, you can contact us. We won't be like fuck off, unlike your other friends. And that's mostly it. Uh, uh, from the English aspect and all that, I would say for the communication part, this book I was revising it before having a podcast, how to influence friends and win. Sorry, how to win friends and influence people. And again, like the Bengali translation to this book is kind of funny. You can search it up in the Google. The title is funny. So this book has helped me a lot on the communication part, how to articulate stuff, certain stuff to people. And the biggest lesson, what was the biggest lesson that you took from this book?
I feel as all of them were foundations, it's more like I'm kind of a person who reads the whole book and I'm like, I'm gonna execute everything. I'm gonna just make everything important. So I'll have to check my notes honestly, but I would say compliments, the first principle. That was something that really hit me hard because after I learned it for the first 3 months, I was like observing myself, like how I used to feel whenever someone told me something good. Like I still remember someone telling me that, "Hey, Anirban, your jawline is so sharp," and I felt so good, and I still remember it. So I think compliments, of course, genuine compliments. If you go to a girl and hey, you're looking incredible, just like any other boy, you won't win her any by any extent. But if you compliment her on something that she has been working hard for a while, but she wasn't getting appreciation. Let's just say she was working a lot in English, but everybody was criticizing, and you go to her and like, hey, let's just say Sadia, and your pronunciation has improved so much. I really can sense a difference. Could you just help me as well so I can improve as well? She would fall from sky after you say that because that is genuine, that is true. So compliments, I think appreciation has become a huge lesson from me, and it has become a bound to who I am now as well. It's not to say that others weren't important, like criticism, though it has been like a bit problematic for me because I feel like I criticize all day now people around me because most of people are for me are like workmate at the moment, but nevertheless, that's a business side communication that we'll probably discuss in future as soon as possible. So that's for me. What about you? What is the biggest lesson for you?
Biggest lesson, before that, I would want to speak about how this book gets like misinterpreted. Is that people think these as manipulative ways to win people and all that. Say if you were to appreciate Sadia just to win her and make her go to a date, you would fail. This is not like pick a book. This is another approach to life, and that's what we emphasize on here. We are not talking about any how-tos, like we surely are talking about how-tos, but these are like kind of long-term how-tos. And if we take on this book, cite on every lesson and say that we have to do it, and we go on like preaching every day, it won't work if we don't adapt it in our mind that this is another approach to life. The
Exactly.
biggest lesson from this book was to think in other person's terms. Like Dale Carnegie is explicitly said this thing that he is exactly what you would be under similar circumstances. So in a situation, what the other person might be thinking, and getting that point of view was the key, most prominent lesson from that book for me. And it was like eye opening, but still, it's very uh, hard to do that in our culture because this is a two-way thing. If I want to see the perspective of Anirban in a specific situation, he has to also see my perspective. Then that's communication. Other than that, it's like hassle. It's like quarreling around. One would speak, other would listen. No, that kind of communication doesn't happen. So yeah, improving on your communication has a lot to do with your approach to life, and that's mostly it. That's like developing your English, talking with someone, talking with multiple people, developing a public speaking. You can read thousands of books written by Dale Carnegie on communication, but if you don't change this approach towards life, that I won't be able to speak in English because I'm around my friends and they would make fun of me. That's the thing that you're going to getting stopped at.
That's a breakthrough you want to achieve. Like I remember myself like whenever I used to learn those things, principles from Dale Carnegie's book, and I was to be eager, like okay, I have to execute it. So the first time execution is the hardest all the time. After that, it gets so engrossed with you. That's not the proper word to use. That sounds very stiff. But nevertheless, it's more like it gets embedded with you. I think that's the proper terminology. So before we put this chat over here, a few things that people always discuss. So let me first discuss one like vocabulary. Like many people think about like, hey, my vocabulary is poor and I can express my thoughts because it's poor. So I won't say why it's poor and how you would improve it. It's definitely not how your teachers say that, hey, buy a dictionary and start reading all of them. It's never gonna work. And I tried it myself. Like I used to read 10 words every day and I barely remember like 10 words out of the thousands of words I actually wrote, learned. It's never that way. How you want to learn is through imagination and feelings. To give you one example, recently I got diarrhea. So when you got diarrhea, there are several feelings you feel, right? So even without any words, despite Bengali or despite English, there are many ways you feel it. So a feeling that you have in your stomach, a feeling that you have when you have to go to washroom, a feeling that you have when your head is heavy. There's several so many feelings and situations when you are just in diarrhea. So what's the best approach is that you learn those words right then. Then you won't learn a word, for example, eloquence, which means in Bengali, শুদ্ধভাবে কিছু বলতে পারা. So you won't learn that word as শুদ্ধভাবে কিছু বলতে পারা because it won't be translation into Bengali. Rather, you'll understand eloquence more as a vivid picture of someone eloquently, I mean articulately speaking about themselves, very confidently, very clearly talking. You will have that vivid image in yourself. That's when those words stick with you. You don't have to intentionally remember, they'll be in your subconscious and you'll really understand them. And it'll work in flash rather than you translating. And that's the problem people would happen to have when they speak. They stutter. Why do they stutter? Because they're using old software, honestly, right? Like how you're using Bengali as a translation device to speak in English. When you're talking with your, let's say you're talking to Rohit, he's speaking with you in English. You take that communication, you translate that in Bengali, then you understand that, then you again translate it in English, and then you pass it on to him. See so many cycles and stages that's happening. That's why native speakers, sorry, non-native speakers are so slow. That's why they're not confident. So what you have to do is make English as the first way communication, that where you do not need to translate, and that only can happen when you can think of the vivid pictures, vivid feelings, and you can do only intentionally by understanding the root understanding and pictures of the words. So that is some last point I would add to that. If you want to add something on that, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, this was a good perspective because in the first place, when we used to speak, it was like we used to get it is mostly like natural language processing, NLP. As I work with Python right now, it's like that. Computer takes on your language, it translates in its language, and then it performs another systematic approach, and then it turns out into human language, and then it comes back to you. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that in English, especially. You have to think in your mind in English. Let's say we used to emphasize on this thing in the very first like early days, let's say. We used to emphasize on thinking in English, and that's mostly it. That's it for today's podcast, and I hope you got some genuine value from it. We'll see you at another episode, and uh, till then, goodbye. Have a nice day.